Hello and good morning, England. Welcome to this webinar, Indonesia, the biggest economic power in ASEAN. To introduce myself, Karen Butterfield, the Project Director for the Overseas Business Network. I've been working in Indonesia for nearly 3 years now, firstly for the British Embassy, managing the Great Britain campaign, and over the last 2 years here at Bridgetown, supporting UK SMEs into the Indonesian market. And during that time, we've supported over 1,000 British companies, we've delivered 40 complex market research reports, and we've supported a number of successful in-country visit programs. I've got my co-presenters here, Chris and Dan, and you will notice from the marketing we've got a change of speaker. We had Jeremy Kemp originally, and unfortunately he can't be with us today, so we've got Chris Wren, who's kindly stepped in. What I will say is you won't be shortchanged because he's been in Indonesia for over years. And on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Chris, who will introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody in England. Chris Wren here. I'm Executive Director of the British Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia. I've had this role for 7 years and previously been involved in business relating to financial services, human resource development, and for the last 5 or 10 years more associated with startup and turnaround projects. So I'm not a specialist in any particular field, but certainly have an awful lot of general information to share regarding this market, in particular market access.
Thanks, Chris. I'll pass you over to Dan.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Good to be on this webinar, and thanks to Bridgetown for inviting me to take part. I represent the European Union's desk within Indonesia's Investment Coordinating Board, so very much the equivalent of UKTI over here in Indonesia. The EU set up a desk about 15 months ago now, and I've been heading that desk for just over a year. We're following what many other countries have done around the world, including Japan, Taiwan and South Korea, where lots of donor agencies have established representative offices in Indonesia's Investment Coordinating Board, or BKPM for short, to help facilitate investments in what is often a very complex market, but as we'll discover in today's webinar, a market that is abundant with opportunities in a broad variety of sectors. So, as I say, I've been living here for shortly over a year, but I've been coming back and forth to Indonesia for more than 3 years now, so I have a good steer and understanding of how this country works and what the investment opportunities are.
Okay, thank you, Dan, and we now go into the main part of the presentation. Okay, so just briefly positioning Indonesia in the region. So exciting major change been happening with the activation of ASEAN's economic community. The main aim is to create a single market for business, production and productive labour, and also reduce taxes between the countries in that bloc. Indonesia makes up about 40% of the total GDP in the region, so Indonesia being a powerhouse of the region. It's got over 250 million in population. It is creating a larger number of people into the middle class every 5 years than the total population of Singapore. So depending on the sector, Indonesia should be a target market for your business. If you have activities within ASEAN, it definitely needs to be evaluated to make an informed decision on whether to be in or out of the country. Okay, so to Indonesia itself, the first thing I can say is it's absolutely huge. It's got 17,000 islands and of about 6,000 inhabited. The 60% of the population live in Java, where most of the top-level decision makers are. As you can see from the map I've put up, I've got one underneath of Europe. It stretches a similar distance of Europe, and it spans 3 different time zones. So getting to Indonesia, like most ASEAN countries, is a long flight from the UK, about 17 hours. And if you wish to travel outside of Jakarta, it also takes a considerable amount of time, and logistics can be difficult. In a report that was published just last month, it named Jakarta the king of awful traffic. It is the world's worst, and Surabaya, Indonesia's second biggest city, is 4th. So please factor this in if you're thinking about moving around once you get here. However, it's not all doom and gloom. I've mentioned the population of 250 million and the rise in middle class. So just because of its sheer size and potential, Indonesia is too big of a country to ignore. I'm going to hand you over to Chris, who will elaborate a little bit further on the second cities that have grown faster than Jakarta.
First of all, I'd like to just give you a little bit of backdrop to this particular slide and 3 or 4 others that I'm going to rely on during my segment of this presentation. The British Chamber of Commerce 3 years ago set up the Business Confidence Index, the only reliable business index that is produced by a Chamber of Commerce. We've expanded that to include our European Chamber colleagues, so it is now run with BritCham, also the French, the Germans, the Dutch, and Eurocham as well. So this is a very reliable sample that we have for these results. We released it last week, so actually you are privileged to be among the first to hear this outside of Indonesia. But there was one particular slide that we first introduced last year for the BCI 2014 survey, which asked businesses what their intentions were with regard to expanding within Indonesia. And we asked that because we're very, very Greater Jakarta centric. And very often it is possible to forget just how vast the country is and how diverse the opportunities are way outside Jakarta and Java. In the 2014 survey, it was very clear that substantial numbers of those surveyed already had intentions to expand into Surabaya, which is in East Java, and Bandung in West Java, and also Bali. The same question was asked this year, and as you can see, still Surabaya is mentioned. But what we are now presuming from these results is that those who expanded or had intended to expand into Surabaya and Bandung went ahead. So those intending to expand now are looking to move into other places. And there's considerable diversity. Sumatra, which as you look at your screen on the left, totaling 37% if we add in Medan and Lampung, both towns and cities within Sumatra. On the east side of Indonesia, Sulawesi with 30%, and still further considerable investment planned also in East Java. What I would say, as we have moved around the country trying to get to know what the opportunities are in these places, and in Surabaya we have just established a full-time resource there. What we're seeing is that all of these smaller towns and cities, several of which have got populations in excess of 5 million, all have their scaled-down versions of what Jakarta is planning to do in terms of transit systems, bridges, toll roads, education, health facilities, and so on. Okay, so if we move to the next slide, I think some of these have actually been covered for you. So not wanting to labor on points already made earlier by my colleague Karen, it is the largest population of Southeast Asia. 40% of the total GDP comes from Indonesia. It is also the fastest growing middle class, and this is of particular interest to British businesses in certain sectors, in particular 3 to 5 million a year, depending on what surveys you read. Although Indonesia's economic growth has been under a little bit of pressure in more recent quarters, there's still a very healthy 4.73% coming out. And once the country has adjusted a little bit from dependence on natural resources, that is likely to bottom out and to start to rise again. Most importantly, and certainly something businesses should consider in the context of international relevance, is that Indonesia is the only ASEAN country that is a permanent member of the G20. In terms of those consumers, notably 60% are under the age of 30. The middle class is estimated to grow to 149 million over the next decade. Now, if one considers that the population of Malaysia is in fact around about 30 million, that puts things in particular context. It's a younger generation that have a huge appetite for foreign international goods, and I would say, of course I'm going to say this, but it's very, very true, that brand Britain is highly respected as providing excellent value. Indonesia is known as the social media capital of the world, so when considering promotion in a market like this, things like that need to be given due consideration. And you'll note there that among the largest users of Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Of course, if it was also very, very easy, then just about every business that could manage to fill a suitcase and get on a plane would be here. It is a developing country, and developing countries invariably have significant challenges associated with market access. Every country is different, and for Indonesia, a particularly careful approach is certainly needed. One thing for sure that is invariably of concern to businesses is the legal uncertainty. A number of law changes can take place. Their implementation is very sporadic. There's a lot of red tape, and the regulatory environment is not necessarily predictable. Overall, we would say that the country would benefit enormously from a great deal more consultation with business ahead of the introduction of laws and new regulations. Unfortunately, that is not the case at the moment. Culturally, it's also significantly different as well, with approximately 86% of the country being Muslim. It's the largest Muslim population in the world, and once again that means considerable consideration must be put into some of those cultural differences. One thing for sure, it is very, very rare for any business to get done remotely. You need to physically get here. There needs to be face-to-face contact, and relationships need time to develop. Going back to our survey, the Business Confidence Index of 2015, I think some of this amplifies what I have just mentioned in terms of challenges. So, reminding you, these are European businesses that are already invested here and are domiciled here. The top three challenges are the bureaucratic efficiency or red tape. And that is very, very little changed, although heading in the right direction from 2014. Likewise, the regulatory environment and labour policy, and in particular there has been for 3 consecutive years a considerable rise in the minimum wage, which has impacted margins for business. However, what is good to see is that there is a significant or there is a decline in the significance of some of these challenges, like the lack of skilled labour, the lack of infrastructure. Karen alluded to the traffic, corruption itself, and also political and social stability. I'm always very reluctant when people say, well, what are the key sectors in Indonesia? Because when you've got a middle class that's likely to hit close to 150 million over the next decade, actually, there probably isn't anything that doesn't have a chance of being marketed into this country. But to highlight some key sectors and opportunities, there are some there. The UK has benefited from its highest number of Indonesians going to the UK and attending either undergraduate or postgraduate education of recent years. We're well represented in the financial and professional services. We've mentioned that infrastructure, a lot of projects have actually got going in recent months, where there have been all sorts of obstacles and blocks in previous years. The oil and gas sector is flat. The healthcare sector is now starting to benefit from the possibility of the development and the maturing of a national health service scheme. Retail is always going to be good when you've got a younger population that is getting more and more affluent. Strategically, defense will always have a role. In terms of energy, we've put alongside that the environment, lots of interest in renewables, clean energy, waste to energy, that sort of thing. The creative sector, manufacturing is not down there specifically near the bottom. It in fact is one of the focuses of the Indonesian government, and our colleague at the EU desk will talk about incentives that are coming into play. Indonesia wants to move itself further up the value chain, reduce its dependency on importing goods required as components for final production, and hospitality and tourism. In terms of the outlook, and again, this is a slide from the Business Confidence Index. Basically, what you will see is one of two businesses surveyed, and as I say, the sample was significant, are extremely positive, 50%. Almost 1 in 2 are almost certain that they will be making further major investments in Indonesia in the next 2 years. Again, that is very significant. So to sort of sum up, the opportunities are tremendous. There are challenges. Those who've been here, many of those businesses have been here a while. They've invested in their knowledge and their relationships. And the vast 1 in 2 of them are very, very sure that they plan to reinvest further. These are the top 5 business sectors that have those positive outlooks. Infrastructure, including construction, hospitality and tourism, food, beverage and retail, if we put those together, and the agriculture sector, my sense of which overlaps with things like renewable energy opportunities as well.
Okay, thanks Chris, and I'm just going to hand you over to Dan, who will give the government or the EU desk take on it.
Sure. Well, I think first thing to say is clearly you're seeing some very similar sectors, as you'd expect, from the ones that Chris has just mentioned. I suppose what I would try and do is, as Karen has said there, give an overview of what the government sees as being its priorities, not just sectors in the broadest term, but with a specific view to foreign direct investment here in Indonesia. Now, like Chris said, I mean, a country the size, diversity of Indonesia is clearly going to need investment in a whole range of areas. So you'll see on the left there some of the broad groupings that the government has prioritized for investment, ranging from infrastructure, agriculture. There's obviously a very broad industry grouping which ranges from labor-intensive industries through to import substitution industries, export-oriented industries. There's a big important maritime axis, as well as a tourism special economic zone, or SEZ, and industrial parks axis. So I just thought I'd offer some comments on not all of these, because I think we'd be here for a very long time, but some of the really interesting sectors that offer up investment opportunities. And we have lots more information, much like Britcham as well, that outline the market opportunities, national capabilities, and the government provisions and support in a whole range of the sectors presented here, which we can obviously follow up on individually after the webinar. But looking at that one at the top, infrastructure, and it really starts from power generation. There's a very ambitious target over between 2015 and 2019, the current 5-year period we're in, to generate an additional 35 gigawatts of capacity. So a big ambition and a great need for power here in Indonesia. Now, traditional non-renewable resources will continue to play a major role, I think, for the foreseeable future, but renewables are playing an increasing role too. The government actually aims to have 23% of the energy mix from renewable and new energy by 2025. And in the EU desk, we've been supporting some planned European investments in areas such as solar and hydro. We've already worked with one investor that's obtained their provisional license for activity in solar. So we look forward to helping attracting more investors in this space. Seaports is also mentioned, and the 24 seaports that the government aims to construct and build will be key to really unlocking Indonesia's potential as a connected archipelago. Karen was mentioning earlier there's some 17,000 and some such islands across the archipelago. So a good connection of seaports is going to be critical to success. And again, we've seen some European successes in this area. We've helped a crane manufacturer and maintenance firm that recently set up in Indonesia in partnership with a local firm. There are also massive opportunities in other areas of transport, notably in airports, and there are 14 airports that the government wishes to build again across the country. Then there's that second large access industry, and I'll put a few comments on those. Given the size of the country, the number of people overall and those entering the job market every year, clearly investments that create a large number of jobs is very important from BKPM's perspective. I mean, as one example of the efforts they're undertaking to support large-scale investments that create jobs, they created recently a dedicated facility for supporting investments in textiles and shoe manufacturing. Of course, BKPM's support doesn't stop there, and it has a lot of initiatives to support large-scale investments that I'll come on to a little bit later. But they did recently establish, as I say, these dedicated facilities to support investment in textiles and shoe manufacturing. And Indonesia actually has a very strong track record and clusters of both domestic and foreign companies in those two areas, and strong workforce availability and skill sets that are strong in those two areas. Thinking a little bit about food and beverage manufacturing, there's also a very strong proposition for investment here in Indonesia. Beyond the growing consumption and an endless, quite literally, appetite for new and quality products, there are many, obviously, raw materials that are required for the production that can be found in abundance here in Indonesia. And there are numerous incentives, such as an import duty exemption facility for machineries, equipment, goods, and raw materials for production, which all add to the country's investment attractiveness. Chemicals is mentioned there as well. Really a booming market for plastics, oleochemicals, fertilizers, and again, a pretty strong manufacturing proposition with an abundance of raw materials, skilled, cost-competitive labor, and strong existing clusters. As you'd expect, some of the major chemicals players from around the world are already here. The likes of BASF, Clariant, the list goes on. Pharmaceuticals was mentioned there by Chris as an opportunity area as well. The government is indeed committed and has an ambition to the provision of universal healthcare by providing basic primary healthcare. And this obviously opens up some pretty important opportunities for foreign investors. I'll come on to the document that outlines the allowances and limitations for foreign investment in various activities and sectors a bit later. But just to say at this point that it is an area that's very open for foreign investment. In fact, it's open for 85% foreign direct investment, which would mean the requirement to identify a local partner. But again, the EU desk, BKPM, Britsham and other partners are all able to help in that search for potential partners and facilitate those introductions. Electronics is another area mentioned there. Consumer electronics and electronic components are both on the rise, and Indonesia has really become a major electronics import and export platform for Southeast Asia and beyond. Fisheries, abundant opportunities come from obviously the massive diverse archipelago, from cold storage to fishery processing and packaging to aquaculture. Shipbuilding, the government is targeting approximately 1,500 vessels of varying types and sizes to support what the government calls a sea toll program, which is essentially a project which aims to create a nationwide logistics route through 5 hub ports and 19 feeder ports across the country. Tourism was mentioned a little bit earlier. Indonesia is the world's second most biodiverse nation, and therefore offers loads of untapped tourism opportunities, from eco-resorts to MICE tourism to luxury integrated resorts. There are also special economic zones dedicated to tourism, such as one that's in southern Lombok. Many of you may well know Lombok, right next to Bali, so really one of the up-and-coming tourist hubs for Indonesia, and there's a special economic zone in Lombok called Mandalika. It's one example of how the government is really seeking to attract and incentivize foreign investment in strategic tourism areas by providing tax discounts that can range, in this case, from between 20 to 100% for up to 25 years, along with a VAT exemption on the import of raw materials, as well as property ownership and residence permits for foreigners. Okay. Beyond the opportunities, I just wanted to make a brief reference to actually how international organizations are increasingly seeing Indonesia as a competitive economy, not only regionally, but also globally. And what we've done here is actually shown how Indonesia ranks in comparison with some of its peer markets, not only here in the ASEAN region, which you can see in the table on the right, and it performs reasonably well there. I mean, it holds its ground. I mean, clearly someone like Singapore is going to always be in the top 5, and I think for the past 2 years it's been in second place, and it's clearly in a league of its own. But the World Economic Forum really does see Indonesia on a global level performing quite well in terms of its competitiveness. Okay, so not quite at the same level as Thailand, but not particularly that far behind, but ahead of other ASEAN hotspots like Philippines and Vietnam. But of course, when we think of Indonesia, as Chris mentioned, it's a G20 member, so we shouldn't just be comparing Indonesia with ASEAN. We should be comparing Indonesia with some of the other global hotspots and markets around the world, the likes of the BRIC markets, the likes of the mint economies, in other words, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. And there you actually see that Indonesia performs very well. In fact, it outperforms, according to the latest list, all the markets of the mint economies and the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the only exception being China, which is in 28th position. So it's quite a well-known and powerful endorsement from the World Economic Forum for Indonesia's competitiveness. A little bit earlier, there was the presentation there of the Business Confidence Index from the Indonesian perspective, purely, and from investors that are doing business here day to day in Indonesia. And I thought it might be useful to just complement and add to that by looking at the broader Asian region and seeing where investors and companies see their degree of confidence in this region now and in the years to come. So here you really see investor confidence in Asia, and it's interesting to note that Indonesia comes second only to China. So close to 60% of respondents in this survey, of which there were more than 700 corporate executives, all based in the Asia-Pacific region, saying that the level of investment plans to increase. So 60%, I think it's a pretty strong endorsement, as I say, second only to China. So it really is the other market that people are looking at in the broader Asia-Pacific region. I wanted to talk very briefly just about some of the initiatives that BKPM, the ministry, has been undertaking since the President Joko Widodo, came to power at the end of 2014. One of the first things he did was to instruct the true establishment of a one-stop service at BKPM. What does this actually mean? Essentially, it means that there are 22 ministries that are now represented within BKPM and that are there not only to process the various licenses that are needed, but also to have face-to-face or over-the-phone conversations with investors or their representatives to answer specific questions to address problems. So we talked earlier about the problems of traffic in Jakarta. This has already made the actual process of applying for and seeking advice on licenses in order to establish a business in Indonesia much simpler than it used to be. You no longer have to go to various different ministries. You only actually have to come to BKPM. And last year, 2015, was really all about embedding this one-stop service in BKPM. So the representatives came from the ministries, 162 permits nationally were delegated to BKPM, and this activity has been rolled out and replicated throughout Indonesia. As some or many of you may know, Indonesia is a devolved country. The provinces enjoy a lot of and a considerable degree of autonomy, but the President was very clear that this principle of a one-stop service wouldn't just apply to Jakarta, so that when you go to a specific province, the same level of service and the same one-stop service provides. And there's a little bit of information in terms of the progress that has been made by the government in this area, but the short takeaway is essentially it's happened at a national level. 90% of it has happened at a regional level, and it's important also to say that the whole system, nationally and regionally, has moved online. So you have online licensing applications that are now done, which makes clearly the process much simpler than it used to be. It means that, of course, you can actually apply for licenses from the UK. A little bit of information there also on the number of permits to give a sense of the activity. At BKPM, more than 17,000 permits were issued last year, and most recently, right at the end of last year, a 3-hour investment licensing service was launched by the chairman of BKPM. It's not for all investments. It is restricted to what the government sees as larger scale investments. So the minimum investment required to take advantage of the 3-hour service is 100 billion rupiah, which in today's currency equates to about 7.5 million US dollars. So, you know, depending on the types of investments you might be looking at, not a massive undertaking, but it really does mean that you can come to BKPM and have some of your key licenses, your principal license, your work permits, import license, all processed within 3 hours. So it's not a finished game. Efforts do continue from BKPM nationally and at a regional level, but the situation and the ease of processing licenses is in a much better position than it was before. Okay. Beyond the actual systems in place, a number of incentives and economic packages have been undertaken by the Indonesian government recently to improve the investment climate. Late last year, there was a wage formulation initiative undertaken to ensure that there's a more certain formula for businesses. I'm sorry you can't quite read all the details on there, but essentially it means that wage increases will be based on the inflation rate and economic growth. So it will, while of course wages will need to increase, there'll be a degree of greater certainty and stability in that area. There's also a cost reduction initiative that was announced by the government late last year for fuel, gas and electricity. So what does this really mean, and what did it include? The package essentially included cuts in the prices of diesel, gasoline, LPG canisters, and other areas. And the government has also introduced incentives for electricity, which include lower rates when the benchmark domestic oil price falls, discounts on late night to early morning use of electricity, and even, in some cases, a relaxation of payment for outstanding electricity bills. And the third box there on the right, more open to foreign investments. There's a new regulation that is currently underway. It's called the Negative Investment List. It's a slightly unfortunate name, but don't read too much into it. In fact, it's quite broadly a positive list because there are only a few areas that are actually closed to foreign investments, and they're in areas that you would often expect, like certain strategic areas of defense and other areas. But the vast majority of areas are open. They are sometimes open with conditions in terms of the amount of investment that the foreign shareholder can have. Interestingly, this regulation is undergoing a revision as we speak. Actually today, the President is convening various ministers to go through the latest proposed revisions to that list. So actually within the next couple of days, we should be much clearer on what this new list will look like. And of course, we'll then be happy to share the details and discuss where those limitations are. But the general direction of travel has been one of opening up more to foreign direct investment. To give you some examples, and I can't confirm 100% at this stage, but some of the areas that they've been talking about to liberalize investment have included things like e-commerce, cold storage, power generation, especially for renewables. Smaller scale power generation was previously capped to 49%, but that is going to open up much more. Distribution and healthcare are also going to hopefully see some improvements too. If you go on to the next slide, thank you. Yeah. Some other investment climate improvements that the government has undertaken. There's now no VAT for shipbuilding, railway and airplane industries. There's no double taxation for property and infrastructure. And there are tax discounts of up to 50% on net income tax given to export-oriented industries such as textiles and footwear. So where has this kind of led BKPM and Indonesia's investment performance in the past few years? The short answer, and on the left you'll see there the graph, is that it's been an upward trend. The pace of growth in US dollar terms has been slightly slower in the past few years. In fact, it dipped ever so slightly in 2014, but it did reach a record high in 2015 of, well, close to $30 billion. And in terms of the main areas of investment, main sectors globally, they've been the likes of mining, transportation, warehousing, and telecommunications, and you can see the rest listed there. Okay. That ambition continues from the Indonesian government, so I've just given you a sense of where the Indonesian government wants to go in terms of FDI realization in the years to come, and you can really see that by 2019 there's a high ambition to reach $41 billion US dollars from FDI. And there's also an ambition to really support investment that goes beyond the populated island of Java. So really support investment in other parts of Indonesia. The government very much supports that. Okay. In terms of European FDI in Indonesia, the UK really does matter. BKPM's actual representative in Europe is based in London, and we've got a slide I think later to introduce you all to him if you don't know him already. But really the UK is a key investor in Indonesia, along with other countries like the Netherlands and France, but really a very important investor. And many of the UK's multinationals are here and doing extremely well. I mean, you've got Unilever, which I know is not uniquely UK, it's Anglo-Dutch. They employ more than 6,000 people here. In a recent sign of the company's growing confidence, they established a new palm oil processing plant in North Sumatra. Rolls-Royce is here, and last year the company was selected by Indonesia's fast-growing low-cost carrier Lion Air to provide its Trent engines in a deal worth about $140 million. But it's not really just the FTSE 100 firms and other UK multinationals that contribute to these strong figures from the UK. You've got quite a few, well, a lot of medium and even small to medium-sized firms that have successfully established subsidiaries here in Indonesia, and especially, but not uniquely, in the business services sector. I mean, I'll just name a few here because they're public. Their investments here, the likes of Dog Digital, which is a digital media agency they set up in Jakarta a couple of years ago, taking advantage really of the abundant business opportunities offered by the nationwide adoption of social media that was mentioned earlier. Michael Page, the recruitment business, they established in Indonesia and have been expanding their portfolio of services. Transcal, it's a leather seating and interior manufacturer for cars, established in Batam, which is just off Singapore, and others. I could go on forever, but it really gives you a flavor of the types of companies that are investing in Indonesia, and they're not all multinational, huge companies. Some of them are medium-sized firms too and doing very well. Okay, I'll finish off just with 6 good reasons if you want to invest in Indonesia. I won't repeat too much of the details, but I think it's worth really driving home that Indonesia is close to 50% of the ASEAN market and really does have the potential to be a regional hub. It's the most competitive, as we saw, of all the brick and mint markets after China, according to the World Economic Forum. We've talked about the booming aspirational middle class that is set to reach around 150 million people, so really huge numbers here. The large youthful workforce, the fact that more than 50%, well over 50% of the population are aged under 30. It's a cost-competitive location for numerous project types, and we actually have benchmark data thanks to the Financial Times' tool FDI Markets that actually benchmarks Indonesia's costs against some of the other markets in the region. They're available on our site. We'll be happy to share with you some of those details. It's freely and available. And that last point, I hope I did transmit it, the fact that there is a track record and ongoing commitment to improving Indonesia's climate.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. I'm just going to finish off because I know time's getting on. Dan gives some real good reasons why to invest in Indonesia and some of the positive steps that the government's made in the past year. So just to touch on this slide of top business tips, I think it's fair to say that do your research, check the country suits your business profile and aspirations. Please feel free after the call to get in touch with myself and we can set up a Skype call so we can discuss your product or service that's specific to the market. Obviously I'll link you in with BKPM and other relevant people. I think it's fair to say, Chris touched on this earlier, but making one trade mission mightn't get you very far. It needs regular commitment. He mentioned about the face-to-face, so a couple of visits a year will get you going in the right direction. Obviously, be price sensitive. One size doesn't fit all. He touched on local etiquette. That's very important. It's the largest Muslim country in the world. Cultures tend to be different, and you've got to bear this in mind. So if you came out, please speak to us and we can give you some advice on this before you get out. It's fair to say that you can never be over-networked, so cast your net widely, collect as much information as possible, especially with what we call out here unofficial insiders. That's a good way to know about the latest changes in Indonesia's regulatory environment. So you can speak to us before you come out. We've got a board that collectively have over 200 years experience in country, and we'll be able to tap you and link you into that. I'm just going to finish off because I know time's getting on, to say patience is a must. It normally takes 24 months from starting your business to you actually get profit in your bank. So finally, I hope that adds up to a picture that you really need to start now. I'm going to hand you back to Jill, who will lead us through the question and answer sessions. Jill, back to you.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you for all the presentations. We've got a really large audience today, and so we have lots of questions in. We won't be able to get through all of the questions today, but your questions will be forwarded to the team and we will follow up with you afterwards. So taking our first question here, and this is from Sheena, and Sheena is asking, regarding Indonesia being the social media capital of the world, what is the source of those statistics and where can I find out more on the breakdown of the use for trends, demographics, time of use, etc.?
Okay, Sheena, Chris Wren here. Thanks very much for that question. It fascinates a number of people, I think. Our data actually comes from Edelman and Nielsen. They are two businesses that we rely on for data like that, and certainly consumer-related data, Nielsen in particular are very, very strong on, and we probably have something we can share with you. Indonesia's a strange place, I would say. You know, even way out in the villages, they've sort of skipped the hand phone now. They all go straight to the Chinese smartphone. So, you know, anecdotally, we can say we see it and witness it all the time, that Indonesians are in fact hooked up to the more modern ways of communicating, which are a challenge to people like me, but they seem to find it all very, very easy. So we'll, the team will follow up with you and share some of the data that we have, but they're the two companies to specifically answer your question, Edelman and Nielsen, both of whom are resident here and have been for some time.
Thank you very much. And moving on to our next question here from Deeps. Deeps is asking, do we have to set up a company or legal entity to operate in Indonesia?
You can trade with Indonesia, but in terms of actually establishing a company here in Indonesia, there are two options. So it would be helpful for me to explain those. Essentially, you've got what's called a representative office, which is primarily used by companies to really build a presence on the ground in Indonesia, conduct the market research, do the marketing, business development, create the relationships that they need. There are no specific criteria that are required for this rep office. A person from abroad can come and be that representative officer, or you could assign an Indonesian to be the representative, or you can have both. You could be the representative officer and you can appoint some Indonesian local staff to work and support with you. The constraints that come with the representative office is you're not actually allowed to generate direct sales within Indonesia, so that any business you actually conduct as a rep office, the actual billing has to be done from outside. It would have to be done through your HQ or some other entity. So there are limitations to the representative office. And then the second option is a limited liability company, which we know the local term here in Indonesia, if you start coming out here, you'll hear a lot of a term called a PMA, which stands for Penanaman Modal Asing. Essentially, it's a foreign company. It doesn't have to be uniquely a foreign company, but it's a company that has at least some degree of foreign ownership. And then certain conditions apply. The negative investment list that I referred to earlier will govern the degree to which you can have a stake or fully own potentially that company. There are also minimum investment requirements that come into play. So currently you have a minimum investment of 10 billion Indonesian rupiah, which in today's currency equivalent equates to about $750,000 US. The paid up capital of that, however, is only 2.5 billion Indonesian rupiah, which again in these days is about 200,000 US.
Thanks, Dan. That's a great summary. If I just add something for Dean, and in fact I suspect a number of other people on this webinar. I mean, there are a number of ways to get started in Indonesia, and Dan mentioned trading right at the beginning of that. So, you know, appointing a distributor, appointing an agent, the rep office for still continuing to test the temperature, so to speak. Our team here is very well versed on being able to guide people as the right methods for them in terms of market access. So Karen mentioned that anyone who really wants to know more in a bespoke way, please take advantage of the opportunity to have the Skype call. They can really understand what it is you want to do, what your products or services are, and then guide you, steer you. Our biggest resource that we have is our membership. Nearly 900 nominees covering all sectors and all things weird and wonderful, and we can delve into them to provide you with the assistance you need.
Thank you very much. And our next question from Steve. Steve's saying, what are the main languages spoken in Indonesia?
Oh, Steve, didn't you know French? No, I'm joking. Sorry, forgive me. Indonesia has Bahasa Indonesia, but really most business is conducted in English. Certainly in the main cities, higher levels, executive senior management, English is fine. Indonesians generally, their social and communication English is good. Written English is to a lower standard. If you were actually to be setting up here, I think it would all be good guidance for everybody to get yourself grasp of some basics and survival Bahasa Indonesia, which you can fairly easily build on. It isn't too complex a language at the more basic level. It's all about just building up your vocab. So you get by fine on English. It's Bahasa Indonesia, and there's always an argument between the Malaysians and the Indonesians as to who owns the language.
Thanks, Chris. I'll just add on to that. If you did decide to come out and visit, we have done some really successful visit programs. Like I said, more people speak English, but it made you feel comfortable. We can assign a member of staff to go out with you to your meetings and help with the language barrier. So that's another service we have on offer.
Thank you very much, Karen. And moving on to our next question from Heather. Is capacity building in the education sector a priority to provide the skills needed for their sectors?
Heather, that's a very good question, and consistently in responses to business confidence indexes, right from the first one that we've done, if one moves away from regulatory uncertainty, legal uncertainty, businesses are saying that the next largest challenge to realizing the potential in Indonesia is the capability of manpower, human resource. As you'll recall from the slide that I put up, the labour supply is becoming less of a concern, but remains a big concern. The government here is entrenched in a system of education that really has not been properly overhauled for decades, and people do know that it needs to be overhauled. The education sector is closed to foreign investment in terms of actually setting up a physical presence in here, which is why many education providers choose different types of looser partnerships, if you like, where they co-deliver different things. In terms of the training and development that goes on, it's fair to say that it really is in the hands of private sector to dig deep into its pockets and budget strategically for any capacity building that's needed at the moment. However, there's a huge lobby among the international community. There's a significant lobby among the educated Indonesians that are very progressive, that recognize why Singapore is ahead of Indonesia, why Malaysia is ahead of Indonesia. And it's that very liberal approach to international engagement in different forms of education at all levels. So we live in hope.
Thank you. And moving on to our next question from Sheena. It's regarding the special free zones for foreign investors. And she's asking where she can find out more information on their locations other than Southern Lombok.
Sure. Well, first of all, BKPM's website, bkpm.go.id. I think that's going to be at the end of the slide. There'll be details put there. So you can definitely get more information on the special economic zones that are across the country as we speak. There are 8 of them existing at the moment and 11 planned. So you'll find information there. And then beyond that, actually, our TSEP, our EU desk, we've developed a lot of marketing insights that also detail specifically what these special economic zones offer and what their sector focuses are. So like I said, the one in Lombok is dedicated to tourism, but others will be looking at refinery, metallurgy, machinery, others looking at fisheries, the list goes on. So have a look at the website, and then for supplementary information you can go to the EU Desk Zone website, and then of course drop me a line if you want some specific information on a specific special economic zone.
Sorry, I was just going to say we will follow up for the webinar with the recording, the link, and any relevant information. Any questions that have gone unanswered, we will directly answer them individually, and I'll link you in with Dan. He'll be popping in the email, so you can just get in touch with him direct.
And more, we are being invited to be a marketing instrument for these special economic zones. We will be in the UK for the Liverpool International Festival of Business, and it is looking highly likely that we may have 2 or 3 SEZ, special economic zones, with us on that particular program. So, you know, please keep an eye on the communications that come out of our office from Karen's team.
Thank you very much. And that is all the time that we have got for the questions. So Karen, if I could just hand back to you for you to go through your last couple of slides.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Just to touch on, because I know time's getting on, Dan mentioned about the BKPM desk in London. This is the contact here, Hackneral. And if there's anything else that you want to add, Dan?
Just to say we really work hand in hand, Packneral and myself. So really Packneral can be there as your point of contact for information and advice when you're in the UK. And then if you're planning a visit here to Indonesia, I can clearly be one of the various people you might want to meet if you're planning an investment here in Indonesia, and we can really pass the baton, as it were. So he's your point in the UK, and I can be one of your contacts for investment in Jakarta.
Thanks, Dan. Just to finish off by saying we've recently launched a complimentary 1-year British business membership for any SMEs to engage with us through our business support services, trade missions or webinars. So please feel free to take advantage. We've already had overseas companies take advantage of this offer. It will be a business introductory service from us. We can give you access to sector-specific focus groups, regulatory information. If you do come to Jakarta, there will be a welcome service with benefits of hot desks, Wi-Fi, informal meeting with myself or Chris or one of the executive members. Just to touch on our up-and-coming events, we have a webinar next month on infrastructure. Richard Michael is the key speaker there with many years of experience in Indonesia. So if you are looking at infrastructure, please, the registration link will be coming out on our website after tomorrow. And we also have food, hotel and tourism in Bali. If there's anybody in them sectors that are interested in coming out and joining us for that, please drop us a line at Exhibition of Richard. And just finally, we mentioned about our contact details. They are all there. Please feel free to get in touch with any of us individually, and we look forward to supporting you in Indonesia. Thanks, Jill. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our presenters today, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar. Once you leave the webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd be really grateful if you could complete that and provide your feedback for us. It's just 3 really quick questions, so if you could keep your browser window open. You will also receive, as mentioned, a follow-up email within 24 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, and under separate email we will be sharing the slides from today's presentation. On behalf of UKTI and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and please do enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.